Angelica, have you ever been told that you look like someone famous? I mean, you're a little, regionally famous, but have you ever been told you look like someone famous?
I do get a couple of people um over and over again. Christian Alfonso, who plays Hope Brady on Days of Our Lives. My husband thinks I look like her and my mother-in-law. And he tells me I'm aging like her.
Is that a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think she looks pretty good. We have similar, I guess, facial features. She's more attractive, so I'm always like, okay, that's fine. I'll take it. I've also been told I look like Heidi Fleiss. And I don't get that one. And I look back to before Heidi Fleiss really messed up her face with fillers. I don't think we look alike. And I've been told the lady who killed her kid,
Casey Anthony?
Casey Anthony, basically just brown-haired, blue-eyed people. What about you?
Well, first off, I want to say, your husband also has a doppelganger that's a really good one. He looks just like that country guy,
Yes, he does.
whose name's escaping me.
So you're not a country music fan, huh?
I am the opposite of a country music fan.
God, the guy with the goatee.
Brad Paisley.
Yes. Yeah, he
Yes.
does. If Bill had brown eyes, he would look a lot like him, and he gets that a lot from his students. I also think there's something about him that looks like Justin Bateman. Am I saying his
I
range?
can see
Jason
that a
Bateman.
little bit. Yeah.
There's something in his face. Who do you get compared to?
Once in a while, I used to get Conan O'Brien, but I don't mean I have like just a big nose and wide cheeks. It's like there's not a lot of famous people with this particular look. But Conan O'Brien, when I had more hair and I would comb it up a little bit, I don't have enough hair now to do that anymore. But yeah, that's what I used to get sometimes. I chose to believe it was because I was so funny, but I have a feeling it was not that.
No, there's something about your face that does look a little Conan-ish. I mean, you're obviously not like 6'5" and with like super, super long legs. Conan's such like an awkward shaped person. But there's definitely something in your face, like your coloring, maybe your nose or something like that.
Nose for sure. I do have super long legs. I just have a 6-inch torso, so it's kind of an odd proportion there.
Welcome to Film Swap, the podcast where we challenge each other to watch the movies that we've let slip through the cracks or purposely shoved into the cracks for whatever reasons. I'm Angelica Thornton.
And I'm Nick Vole. This week we are taking a look back at a Best Picture winner from 1980. It's Ordinary People.
In this typical town, in this comfortable home, three ordinary people are about to live an extraordinary story.
It's starting all over again. The lying, the covering up, the disappearing for hours. I will not stand for it. I can't stand it. I really can't.
What in the hell has happened?
That she hates me. Can't you see that?
Mothers don't hate their sons.
I mean, there's someone besides your mother you gotta forget.
I can't!
You better make sure that your kids are good and safe. And then you come to me and tell me how to be happy.
Do you love me? Do you really love me?
Just do one wrong thing.
And what was the one wrong thing you did?
Donald Sutherland, Mary Tyler Moore, Judd Hirsch, Timothy Hutton, in an extraordinary story of ordinary people.
All right, Ordinary People. I've seen it a couple times. This is the Rotten Tomatoes summary of the movie. Tormented by guilt following the death of his older brother, Buck, in a sailing accident, alienated teenager Conrad Jarrett, played by Timothy Hutton, attempts suicide. Returning home following an extended stay in a psychiatric hospital, Conrad tries to deal with his mental anguish and also reconnect with his mother, Beth, played by Mary Tyler Moore, who has grown cold and angry, and his emotionally wounded father, Calvin, played by Donald Sutherland, with his help of his psychiatrist, Dr. Berger, who's played by Judd Hirsch. Got an 89% tomato meter, 88% audience score. You talked about how it's an Oscar-winning film. This is like the family drama of all family dramas. I think it got Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Supporting Actor for Timothy Hutton.
Mm-hmm.
And this was Robert Redford's directorial debut. Why hadn't you seen it yet?
Well, it's sort of like some of the past ones. It came out when I was 2. It's also the content matter really frightened me off because it's a super heavy movie, and it just seemed like it was going to be boring.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I just gave you another movie 2 in a row, I think, involving suicide attempts
Yeah, teen
by
suicide.
teenagers. What is
Yeah.
wrong with me?
There's something spinning in there. I don't know if I want to
What's
know
going
about.
on? So I saw this years ago, maybe a few times, and it left quite the impression on me. But this is the first time that I've seen it since I became a mom
Mm-hmm.
13 years ago. And I think it hit even harder this time. Um, and I don't want to get too much into how I feel about it because it obviously involves the main character, one of the main characters, Mary Tyler Moore's character. What did you think of the film?
Well, I was prepared to not like it. I really had it in my head that it was going to be boring and stuffy, and I was wrong. I thought it was a really good movie. I really got into it. I really enjoyed it. I think there are some things that haven't aged super well, but for the most part, I believe I'm buying what they're selling. I believe the character arcs. As a parent, you're right. Just there was a point my wife and I watched it with me, and she didn't want to watch it either. She's like, "Can you please pause the movie?" She just needed a break because she's like, "I want Mary Tyler Moore to. I can't watch this because Mary Tyler Moore has this son who's asking her for help, and she's putting him off, and this is
Yeah.
really hard for me." And I felt the same way. You just want to scream through the screen, "Hug the damn kid!" You know what I
I
mean?
know. It really is unbelievable. And I had that reaction the first time, and I've just had this, honestly, this resentment for Beth Jarrett for years. And it's even worse watching it after you have kids. You just,
Mm-hmm.
oh God, it's just so painful. Um, I remember initially watching it because it won these awards, and I felt like it was sort of like required viewing. Oh, that won a bunch of Oscars, and I love Robert Redford. I think he's a good director. Um, but it just, I had this overwhelming disdain for Beth Jarrett. Um, Now I've kind of taken it up a few notches. I've always considered her one of the worst fictional characters
Mm-hmm.
ever. Like,
Worst as in least redeemable. You don't
yes,
mean worst as in worstly written or acted.
no, just least redeemable. And I mean, obviously, aside from like murderers, but
Mm-hmm.
just ordinary people, how they're portrayed in film or even characters in books. I'm just like, she is the worst. She is just the worst person. And obviously it's complicated because of the circumstances of the plot. But now I've moved her from unlikable to the villain category as a
Oh,
mom,
she is 100% a villain, and
you
I think
know?
the movie is very sly in the way that it slowly reveals who she is. Because at first you can tell everybody is just a little off. Everyone's like being tender-footed around one another,
Yeah.
and as the movie goes on, you see Donald Sutherland's character just continuing to reach out. He's sort of clueless as to how
Yeah.
he is supposed to connect with his son, but he wants to connect with his son and keeps trying over and over again, no matter how clunky it is. Whereas the more the movie goes on, the more Mary Tyler Moore's character pulls away and makes
Yeah.
everything about herself, which is
Yeah.
kind of a fascinating, slow burning reveal throughout the movie.
Yeah. The other thing that I realized after watching it this time around is I really appreciate how much this film forces you to think about your own response to grief, which I
Mm-hmm.
didn't do when I was younger because I just didn't have the life experience or the maturity to even think about how important that was. We're all uncomfortable dealing with loss and grief, and I've always felt it's one of my top weaknesses as a person. I'm not great about comforting people. In the past, I've actually avoided people, telling myself that I'm just giving them space. I just make excuses because I'm so uncomfortable with it. But that's just a cop out. I don't do that now, but I still think about all those times in the past where I'm like, oh, I should have reached out to that person. I'm always worried about saying, oh, you know, things will get better. Like saying the wrong thing to someone who's lost someone who's so close to them. I've never lost anyone really close to me.
Mm-hmm.
But this film sort of forces you to think about, okay, what if it's your kid? What if it's, what if it's a husband? What if it's your parents? Like my parents are getting older. My mom's getting older. My in-laws are getting older. So as I was watching it this time, I'm thinking, how are we going to navigate that? How's our relationship, my husband and I, how's our relationship gonna get through that? How would I deal with the loss of a child? what would it be like for the surviving child? And of course, that freaks you out as a parent, but these are all things you probably should be thinking about as an adult.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I have a hard time watching any kind of movie where a child dies now or is injured just for those reasons, because it does force you to confront your own life and the decisions you make. I mean, I have had somebody close to me die. My friend, so actually, right when I got to KATU back in 2005, my first week on the job, I had just switched to overnights, and my friend passed away from brain cancer. And I had to leave my shift in the middle of the day and go.
Ugh.
I was at his bedside, but it was just awful. And I feel like it did teach me some things. I mean, about grief and about being there for people, because what they really want when you're having those moments, what I wanted was not somebody to reassure me. It's just somebody to be there and listen and hang around
Yeah.
and express that they care. And so
Yeah.
I feel like that sort of informed me. But I mean, think we're all guilty of what you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Seeing somebody and you make that mental calculation in your head, is it worth it for me to go comfort them? And there's
Yeah.
times I think we all chicken out and do the wrong thing.
Yeah. And it's especially, I guess it's especially tricky when you're not super close to the person. And I saw that in that dinner party scene where Calvin, Donald Sutherland's character, is sort of walking around talking to people, and everyone's real light. And you can tell they're sort of tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. And then there's a friend that he talks to, the woman in the staircase, who
Mhm.
really reaches out and sincerely wants to know how he's doing. And you could tell she really cared. And I was like, well, that's a good friend right there.
Mhm.
And that's how, I mean, it wasn't too much, but she was like, how are you doing? You know, how's Conrad doing? And I thought, oh, okay, there you go. The difference between her and the other people at the party who are just not even acknowledging it.
Well, and also the difference between her and his wife, Mary Tyler Moore, who comes over to interrupt that
Absolutely.
conversation because that's too
And then
personal.
gets
That's too
angry about
private.
it.
And I think that there's something to be said too about the compelling and accurate, in my opinion, way that the movie portrays a certain sort of, for me, because I'm from the Midwest originally, Midwest mindset, but I'm sure it's prevalent everywhere. WASP, they use that phrase, what,
Yeah.
Anglo-Saxon Protestant. There's this idea that you can't talk about your feelings and you can't talk about things that are happening in your life. Everything is sort of private. And what ends up happening is these things just build up in your life until they explode. You feel alone, or you feel whatever you feel, you can't express it to anyone until it's too late. And I think even like Timothy Hutton's character, his suicide, we don't know exactly what it stems from, but those things work in where you feel like you can't talk to anybody and there's no reason to go on. Or in the case of Donald Sutherland's character, he eventually kind of just snaps and realizes this lady is not the person I need her to be.
It's interesting that you mentioned that Midwestern kind of mentality with that, because it's so foreign. It's so far from how I was raised, like in a Greek immigrant community where at a funeral, women will throw themselves on the ground and cry. And it's really dramatic. And people are super open about their feelings, and to a fault. I mean, it's like, very dramatic. And then all the other non-Greeks I grew up with were like Irish Catholics who talked about it and joked about it a lot. So I get that this must be a Midwestern thing, because I married people from Wisconsin and Ohio, and I see how more closed off, everything's so much closer to the vest with them when it comes to death or these problems, divorce, money problems, anything like that. I can see how differently they respond to all those issues.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I have that in my family, and I feel like I don't mean to criticize my family, but one thing as an adult, as you become sort of self-aware, and as an adult, you kind of realize the things that are good from your family that you want to keep with, and the things that you don't like about your family you want to break with. And that's one of the things I want to break from. I try to be honest with my loved ones as much as possible. But it doesn't always work.
Yeah. And then you can overcompensate too. Like I pull back so much because I'm like, oh, I don't want to be that dramatic Greek.
Yeah.
And then I find I'm not sharing enough.
But you also don't want to be open with people who aren't going to be open back.
Yeah.
Because then it becomes me lecturing you about something.
Absolutely.
And then the resentments build, and how families work. And so I don't know. I felt it was very true. Like there's a lot of truth in it. I mean, I think that the movie was a bit stagey, and I think that's
Yeah.
a product of its time in a
Yeah.
sense. The style of acting, it's sort of, even if you look at the eras, sort of bridges this naturalism versus formalism. It's right on the edge of more of the
Yeah.
formal style. So some of the scenes felt like they came straight out of a play,
I was just
especially.
gonna say that. I was just gonna say it's so clean and quiet and subtle. I felt like I was watching a play. And while it bothered me at certain points during the film, I did also like it because I felt the conflict enough was alone.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like it
Mm-hmm.
didn't need any extra. But it was a little bit raw in the quietness and some of the transitions I didn't like, I guess. But
Mm-hmm.
that was also that 70s vibe that you and I talk about.
Yeah, for sure. And when I was talking about staginess too, I mean, not just, I mean, some of it is the way it's like literally staged, the lighting, and like his office is clearly a set, like, and
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like a real place. So some of it's that, and some of it is some of the more formal language
Yeah.
that they use, that a teenager would not use. They wrote him to be a little adult, I feel like, and
Yeah.
not necessarily a teenager.
All the teens in the film.
Mm-hmm.
His friends in high school, the girl he starts dating. I thought they seemed very mature, and I was wondering if they did that because of like the class issues, socioeconomic status. Maybe that's the way the Jarretts talk in their house.
Yeah, perhaps, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and his buddy that he meets up with, she meets him at the restaurant, has a Coke with him. She
Yeah.
did speak differently, so I
Yeah.
think that perhaps is part of it, the upper middle class sort of upbringing versus her coming from another part of town.
I kind of wish we'd seen more of that character. It was so quick and it was so brief.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I guess the whole point of her being in there was so he could have that breakdown in the end.
Well, yeah, and also to show that it doesn't matter what you say, how you feel, you have to do the
Yeah.
work to get over it. And
Yeah.
she was saying, I can do this for myself, and she couldn't. In the end, she killed herself. So
Yeah. And that way the film does shine a light on the power of therapy, which was not common in 1980.
mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking that Judd Hirsch's Dr. Berger must have been in the back of Robin Williams' mind when he studied for his role in Good Will Hunting. It was very similar
Mm-hmm.
to me and not something you would have seen back then. I mean, even the family had such a problem with therapy. The mother-in-law, when she talked about, oh, he's a Jewish doctor and therapy, and why do we need to do this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and Mary Tyler Moore's attitude towards the whole thing is very dismissive as well.
Yeah.
And so then, like, attaching this shame to trying to get help, that's a real thing. You think you think you're just too good to do this yourself, or you think that, yeah, you would tell our family secrets or whatever. That's so real. Like, I feel that.
Yeah. And boy, have we moved in the right direction.
Yeah, like, to think that this is sort of like outside the norm of what was back then in 1980. This was pushing some boundaries is kind of interesting to me. At least it was pushing boundaries in certain circles, outside of more urban, more sophisticated circles where therapy isn't and wasn't common. This was out there, in New York or something. It's less of a taboo, I guess.
What did you think of the use of Paco Bell's canon throughout the movie?
Well, I found it distracting, I'll be honest with you. I had read that although it was a known song, it was not that ubiquitous then.
Yeah.
And this movie helped popularize it, which is interesting because you always associate it with weddings. And
See, I always associated with this film, and I cringe at weddings.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Interesting.
I've always said, why are they playing canon? Like Ave Maria is not a wedding song, and people played at their weddings. It's like traditionally, I think, a funeral song. So that one bothers me too. But I never liked canon. And I remember bitching about it to a friend, and she was like, well, it was my wedding song. And I was like, I'm so sorry. But it's just, I think it comes back to this movie. I just remember it just like kind of being the thread that connects various scenes. And I don't like it. I don't know why. It just doesn't work for me.
I think it's just because of your connotations. I don't think that it doesn't work for any reason except for the way you interpret
Maybe.
it.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't work for me for the same reason, because all I think about is weddings when I hear it.
It seems it's too happy. I don't know. I mean, he is singing in the school choir, so they're not going to be sitting there crying. But that's one of the things about the movie. I'm like, that didn't work.
Mhm.
Um,
I think he was a little heavy-handed at times in some of its
yeah,
symbolism when
yeah,
Mary Tyler Moore drops the plate and it's, oh, it's broken right in the middle of their argument. She says, "Oh, it's broken." It's like, "Oh, but she's not talking about the plate. She's
yeah,
talking, yeah."
right,
And that's obvious. I mean, but then
yeah,
she like it's two pieces. She's like, "I think it can go back together." And it's
yeah.
like
It's too much.
kind of groaned a little bit when I saw that. Or
Yeah,
when Donald Sutherland's character was jogging and he just started freaking
yeah,
out and he tripped and fell and like symbolism, but it
yeah.
just didn't. It's hard to convey inner turmoil. I get that,
I
but
feel
it
like
just didn't work.
those were scenes that they lifted from the book, and that should have been maybe left in the book version, and
Mhm.
it just
Have,
doesn't
have you read
translate.
the book?
I haven't, but I just feel like that's not, it's literary. It's not really great for movies.
Mm-hmm. I
The
agree.
book apparently was taught in schools for a long time after the film came out.
Mm.
And there were protests all over the country. People hated it.
Because it
And
dealt with suicide.
I just various themes, even language, apparently. And of course, it was one of those things where teachers were fighting for it, and for about 15 years into the 90s, I think they were using it for lessons in middle school and high school.
Hmm. It's interesting. Do you?
Let's
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was going to ask about I want to talk about the acting just a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, first off, so all of the primaries were nominated for something or other. Donald Sutherland was snubbed for the Oscar nom, but he was nominated for Golden Globe. And I don't really like Donald Sutherland in most things, but I thought he was really great in this. I think he was very tender and when he needed to be. And I thought that he conveyed that sort of sad dad thing really well. Like the fake bravado, the fake cheer, but you can
Yep.
sense underneath what's going on. I thought Timothy Hutton was excellent. He really conveyed it. And I thought I'll come back to some of this, but I thought Mary Tyler Moore was perfect. The big famous smile, hiding just all of the,
It was,
turmoil underneath and the ugliness underneath. And that's sort of a perfect metaphor for that entire, outlook. Big
yeah.
smile, black inside.
Yeah. I agree. Donald Sutherland's like spiritual awakening through the movie was great. You could just see it in his eyes. He starts off like enabling Beth
Mm-hmm.
and letting her manipulate him in so many ways, and then turns into someone who's slowly waking up to the realization that, she can't love people. And you can see it. First, he, you know, watches her overreact, underreact, or do things no mother should do. And then he finally just snaps. I loved that. I thought he did a great job. I'm really surprised that he didn't get nominated at all
Yeah, I agree.
for an Oscar.
For an Oscar, yeah. And I was surprised. I mean, it's always hard with Oscars, but Mary Tyler Moore was great and he was great. I think that all of them, well, in particular, Sutherland and Timothy Hutton were playing this as naturalistically as they
Yeah.
can. And that is where some of that dialogue really hamstrung them
Yeah.
because it's hard to be naturalistic when you're reading stagey dialogue. And so
Yeah.
there's times when I felt a little, you know, I don't know. I just felt like they just missed the mark a little bit with the writing. And I think too that the Judd Hirsch character, while necessary, also felt very almost of another movie.
Yeah. So he lost to Timothy Hutton
Mm-hmm.
for Best Supporting Actor. How Mary Tyler Moore did not win for Best Actress is one of life's great mysteries, because I agree she was perfect. She lost to Sissy Spacek in Coal Miner's Daughter.
Yeah, that's a tough one
So
though.
it was a tough year for the Oscars. I think they were up against Raging Bull. Like Robert Redford beat Scorsese out for Raging Bull, which is huge.
Yeah.
She's so good as Beth Jarrett, though. I read an article by a journalist, Julia Hall, who writes a lot about narcissistic personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to share some of it because I think it's spot on. She wrote this when Mary Tyler Moore died in 2017. It was sort of like a tip of her hat for the role that she played in Ordinary People, saying she really took a risk by taking on this role after the Mary Tyler Moore show, Dick Van Dyke show. She talked a little bit about that smile, America's sweetheart. She's got the smile. The world falls in love with her, and then she takes on this really dark character. She wrote, Moore nails it as the perfect on the outside, monster on the inside, narcissist mother and wife, competent, pretty, slim, clever, well-dressed, friendly, and fun-loving to the world, while callous, manipulative, angry, withholding, and unforgiving at home. Through telling enacted family scenes, Moore's Beth is revealed as a classic narcissist, scaffolding gaping emptiness with a persona of perfection, supported by denial, blame, rejection, and rage. Then she says Moore portrays her character's narcissism to a T in turn after turn, from her subtle recoil at Conrad's physical presence to her coolly clipped speech and thinly masked punishing manner, to her disturbingly inappropriate infatuation with Buck, to her sexual and psychological manipulation of Calvin, to her trapped paralysis when Conrad gives her a conciliatory hug after she and his father return home from their New Year's holiday vacation. That scene floored me. When he leans in and he gives his mother this hug, which had to be so hard for him. And not only does she not throw her arms around him, she just kind of looks off.
Uncomfortable,
unwilling. I mean, it was what I'm sitting there thinking, what mom can do that? Only someone with narcissistic personality disorder.
I mean, I don't have anybody like that in my family that I know of. But I mean, I've met you meet moms like this, you meet people like this, and I don't understand how a person can be like that. But I know that they exist, and that's why I felt like she was so good at it, because she just reminded me of these people I know with the big smile, where once you just crack underneath, there's just nothing there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really chilling. She does seem like a monster. I think you said monster earlier. I can't wrap my head around how good she was at leaving us with this feeling, right? And that's why for years I've just thought of Mary Tyler Moore as this just cold bitch, and I feel bad. I mean, she was almost too good in this role.
Yeah. I mean, playing against type or using perceptions of her to be perfect for the role. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the plot. Different points in the plot. Moments that left me just like, what is wrong with you people? First of all, anyone who gives out unwrapped candy apples at Halloween is a sociopath. Let's get that out of the way.
That's an era thing, maybe, right?
I mean, it happened in the 80s, and we would toss them in the bushes because what am I supposed to do with this lady?
Yeah.
But she wanted to be the perfect mom who gave out those dipped candy apples.
And then that's the narcissism again.
Yeah. I don't care if this kid has to put this in a pillowcase. Give me a Snickers bar. What is wrong with you?
Yeah, because it's about what you did for the kids, not what the kids would enjoy.
Yeah. The fact that she doesn't visit Conrad in the hospital for 4 months after he attempts suicide. What in the world? Like, how does Calvin Jarrett, the husband, not flip out at that point? Your wife hasn't gone to see your kid who tried to slit his wrists.
It's easy to rationalize sometimes things. You know, we saw Donald Sutherland's character being very empathetic towards Timothy Hutton's character. He's also being empathetic towards his wife. That's why I think he's letting some of this stuff slide, because, you know, her son died. Her other son tried to commit suicide. In his head, he's thinking she just needs space. She just needs time. She's processing this in her own way. Be patient with her, not knowing that she's never going to come around. She's never going to turn the corner.
Yeah. I mean, that's what you do. You just keep pushing it down the road, I guess. But I don't know. I was so happy that he took that path. He chose Conrad and not his wife, because that might not happen.
Totally.
With certain couples. I mean, they have a good life together. They go on vacations together. She doesn't, withhold quote unquote love from him. So he could have gone the other way and just said, okay, Conrad's going to be fine. But he had this crisis, and I don't know how much his one therapy session with Dr. Berger helped him figure it out.
But who knows? He might have been right on the edge and he just needed a little shove towards doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I also wonder how many of these problems Conrad had before his brother died, before the boating accident. He's clearly got
Sure.
PTSD from that, insomnia, nightmares, loss of appetite. But I think some of his problems predated that. They had to have with a mother like that.
And also a brother like that who's the golden
Yeah.
boy. He's always in the shadow of the golden boy, and even with his friend group, they have little clips of his friends talking about his brother in glowing terms, that they aren't talking about him in that way. He's part of the gang, but he's not, you know, the same as his brother.
Yeah. It also got me thinking about, do I treat my kids the same way? Of course, I've got two boys, they're about the same age difference. And I have a totally different relationship with each kid, depending on their age and
Mm-hmm.
just their different personalities. And so then I start getting paranoid. Okay, do I favor one child over the other? And then I realized, yeah, sometimes I do, depending on what stage they are in their life. Right now, I favor my 10-year-old because he wants to hang out with me and he's nice to me and he's super, you know, snuggly and affectionate and he still loves his mom. And I have a 13-year-old who gives me nothing but attitude, who says things to me like Conrad said to, I think he said it to the therapist in the movie. What are moms for anyway? Brush your teeth, clean your room, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh man, that sounds like me yelling at my kid. Am I a narcissist? But I do worry about, giving each one the same amount of love. And I don't think in a perfect world, I don't think you can even do that.
Do you ever send them off sailing at night in a storm by themselves?
What the hell was that?
Just seems poor parenting, I guess.
I think Bucky really screwed up. We don't know exactly how he screwed up, but it seems to be his fault.
Yeah, and in the movie, right, they're holding on hands on top of the boat, and Buck seems to just let go as a joke almost,
Yeah.
and then he
He's
drowns
Yeah, he's sliding off like Jack off the door in the Titanic.
because he physically lets go. He
Yeah.
doesn't. It's not like a slip. He like lets go and pulls his hand
Yeah.
back.
That's one of those points in the film that could have been better. I also think the ending was very abrupt when they were having that heart to heart
Out on the back step.
in the back step. And I loved the conversation they were having, but I was like, whoa, we're done?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how they could have ended it differently. But I felt like it was a little abrupt.
Yeah, I agree. I think what might have been a nice ending after that is, the camera's pulling out. Maybe you see just even a silent minute of them just driving somewhere together silently together, or something where it's like a non-verbal way of conveying we're in this together.
Yeah.
Just as a coda almost to the film.
Zoom off. Beth Jarrett's cab explodes. The driver survives.
Well, but okay, so it was interesting though that they actually ended it this way. How many Hollywood movies would have, instead of her sticking true to her awfulness and leaving the family, would have figured out a way for them to work it out?
Yeah.
Like this, it's okay. They're going to be okay. We don't know if they're going to be okay, but we know that she's out of the picture, so they probably will be.
Yeah, they wrapped it up really well as far as the direction of where they all went. And I feel like that's obviously the book and that's what happens in the book, but I feel like Robert Redford is really good at that, not
Mhm.
giving the audience what they necessarily want.
Mm-hmm. Serving the story and not the audience.
Exactly.
Yeah, and he's a great director. I mean, I've really enjoyed, like, he directed one of my absolute favorite movies of all time, Quiz Show. Which, have you ever seen that?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
But again, this idea of not letting people, he doesn't let people off the hook, and Quiz Show is another example of that. But that's a podcast for another time. But I think he's very interested in that and not providing pat, neat endings.
Yeah. My favorite Robert Redford film is A River Runs Through It.
Of course it is.
And I loved that movie before I even knew where Missoula was.
Okay.
And it's just a coincidence that I ended up in Missoula out of college. And I remember calling for the job pre-internet, or when there was like one computer with internet at the library. And the news director on the phone said, a river runs through it, Missoula, Montana, because it's a couple of years after the movie came out. And of course, Missoula was blowing up in part because of the movie. And then, of course, I appreciate it now because I've lived in Missoula and my husband's like, there's so many similarities. He's a college professor from Missoula who went to Dartmouth, and it's just very weird because it's almost exactly Norman McLean's life. But I felt like in that movie, the pacing, the editing, the storytelling is perfect. When I watched that movie, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So I think that's when Robert Redford really found his stride. I do feel like in this movie, he did a great job, especially if it was his first film as director. I do feel like it's a little rough in some spots. It's a little too unfinished.
Mm-hmm. I can see that. But I feel like kind of the same conversation we had about Better Off Dead. Some of this is from Timothy Hutton's character's perspective. So some of that to me makes sense because some things are jarring to him, like when he goes back to the swim team and the loudness of that pool and all these things that are sort of upsetting to him. I kind of buy that from an editing standpoint, telling that story. He had a shot in there that I thought was great with the train whizzing by and the graves, the headstones. I thought was a really effective shot, just matching the match cut between the trains and the. So he had a little bit of directorial flair, but for the most part, I think he just laid out scenes really simply and let them happen, which for better or worse. I mean, again, we talked a little bit about staginess and some of that plays into that, but
you know, he directed the actors really well. I think the acting across the board, including like Elizabeth McGovern, and I think this was her first big role, right?
It was.
This sort of launched her career. She was very sweet and endearing, and I did not have a problem with anyone in the movie. I loved all the characters at the cocktail parties. I'm sort of like hate watching that whole scene with these, you know, upper crust people and their parties, and it was so white and it was so country club, but I liked watching it.
Yeah, sure. I get that.
Would you recommend this to other people?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you got to know what you're in for. It's not going to be a fun night, but it's going to be an interesting thought-provoking movie. I think that you have to be prepared for a little bit slower pace because of the era. And also because Redford just directs at a slower pace in all of his films. But yeah, I would absolutely recommend this. I think as a parent, it's harder to watch than you might think it might be. But maybe it's like a litmus test. If you find it hard to watch, you're probably a good parent.
Exactly. That's a really good way to look at it. You can watch Ordinary People on Showtime. It's available in a bunch of other places, like $3.99, I think. What are we watching next week?
Well, I was thinking about this, and I was looking at our list. Last week, I made you watch Hot Fuzz, and one of the movies that it is based on, or lovingly spoofs, is Point Break, and you have never seen Point Break.
I haven't seen Point Break, and one of my second cousins is in that movie. I have to figure out who.
What?
I know. Apparently.
All right. I'm Googling this while we talk. Who's your second cousin?
I don't know this person at all. His last name's Thornton. So look up the cast and see if there's a Thornton in Point Break.
All right. Thornton.
It's probably such a minor role.
Let's stop the podcast altogether while I look this up.
I might have it in my Facebook.
You're going to love Point Break. It is such a fun ass movie. It is a movie also I had resisted for years for watching because I used to, when I was a young, like, cool guy, I thought I was above action movies. When my wife and I first started dating in 98, we were both film snobs, and we would go down to Cinema 21 or Coin Center or wherever you could see. This is before Fox Tower existed here in Portland. You could go see all the art movies. We'd go every weekend. We'd see whatever art film was out there, including some stuff that wasn't very good.
You guys were the first hipsters.
we were like suburban hipsters, though, because I was from Gresham and she was from Clackamas. So we would jetty into the city and watch these films. Anyway, so I never watched it until I was maybe 30, and I was like, where have I been all my life? Why haven't I watched this? Where have I been all my life? Directed by the great Catherine Bigelow, who later won an Oscar. It's a perfect movie. Keanu Reeves is at his very best. Gary Busey, for all his insanity, is perfect. And Patrick Swayze should have won an award for this movie. He is so good in this movie.
You liked it that much?
It's an incredible movie, and I've watched it probably 10 times in the last 10 years. It's amazing.
Okay, I'm super excited. I love Patrick Swayze so much. Miss him all the time. I'm pumped up to watch this.
All right. I think we're going to have a lot of fun with it, and it's available lots and lots of places. I'm still scrolling through the cast
I know.
list, getting
I'm gonna
closer
look-
to the bottom.
I'm going to look through my Facebook messages and see if my cousin was lying.
Well, okay, we don't need to scroll while we're recording here. We just got too excited. I'm really excited to watch this next week. So I guess the bottom line here on Ordinary People is talk to your family members. Don't be afraid. And
Love each other.
love each other. Be kind to one another.
Don't be a bitch like Beth.
Film Swap is produced and hosted by Angelica Thornton and Nick Vole. You can watch or listen on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Follow Angelica on Twitter at Angelica KATU and follow Nick at Nick Vole. Share your thoughts on the films we discussed there, and we might just read them on the show. Music by John Michael Farley and Nick Vole.